The elevator doors opened and the entire room stopped breathing. Caroline Carter stepped out and 300 people forgot what they were saying, mid-sentence, mid-sip, mid-laugh. All of it gone, replaced by the kind of silence that only happens when something enters a room that cannot be explained by any category already in your head. She wore gold, a floor-length gown of Duchess satin that deepened toward the train like the last hour before sunrise. 10,000 Swarovski crystals, hand-sewn in the shape of Cassiopeia across the skirt and train, catching every chandelier simultaneously, throwing light in every direction like she had arrived trailing fire. The 6-foot train swept behind her. Her back was completely bare. A single strand of yellow diamonds traced her spine from the nape of her neck to the small of her back. Like a signature, like a brand, like a dare. She did not look for Park Tae-won when she walked in. She didn't need to. She could feel the exact moment he saw her, because that was the moment the microphone at the podium picked up his silence and broadcast it to every corner of Hansung Tower's 42nd floor. He stopped mid-sentence. The podium, the speech, 300 guests in black tie, all of it froze. Caroline raised her champagne glass in his direction and smiled. She had waited 12 years for that smile. It fit perfectly. If you think you know where this is going, you don't. Stay right where you are. Subscribe before we go any further, because what happens next will have your jaw on the floor and I need you here for every second of it. Now, let's go back to the beginning, because to understand what Caroline Carter just walked into, you need to understand what was taken from her 12 years ago. She was 16 the last time she stood in this building. Not like this, not in gold. She was 16 in a school blazer that didn't fit her shoulders, sitting near the catering service entrance on the ground floor because her father's event coordinator had her down as a server trainee. She poured drinks for 2 hours at a Hansong quarterly dinner, moving through the event with practiced invisibility, and not a single person in that room, including Park Tae-won, who stood 15 feet from her for 40 minutes, gave her a second glance. That was the lesson. The education of being unseen in his presence. She would use it for the next 12 years in ways he never anticipated. The night everything changed was 3 weeks later. The study. Park Tae-won sat behind his desk with his hands folded, his face arranged in the expression he reserved for difficult business conversations. Not cold, not cruel, but contained. The way a surgeon is contained, not because they don't feel, but because feeling during the procedure is a luxury the situation cannot afford. "You understand what Hansung Group is," he said. "Yes, sir." She always called him sir. He had never told her to call him anything else, and she had decided at around 9 years old that she would not be the one to ask. Asking felt like admitting something she wasn't willing to admit. The group is the legacy. Legacy requires clarity. Jisoo and Hyun carry the Park name. They were raised for this. The board knows them. The investors know them. The image of what Hansung must continue to be depends on a lineage that reads as coherent to everyone who holds equity in it. He paused. "You don't fit that picture." Carolyn sat very still. She had felt this conversation approaching for years, the way animals feel weather, a deep body certainty before she had language for it. She had known it was coming, and still had not prepared what to say. "Not because of any fault in you," he added. She noticed he said it the way people say things they need to be true but aren't certain of. "Simply because of what the situation is." "What am I?" she asked. Her voice was steady. That steadiness cost her something she would never fully quantify, but would feel the shape of for the next 12 years. He slid an envelope across the desk. "You are a chapter I need to close cleanly." She looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. Standard white, thick with what was inside. "You tried to raise me," she said. Something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt exactly. Something adjacent that had been managed into something more functional. "Your mother died bringing you into the world. That was not something I could walk away from. But Carolyn, trying and choosing are different things. I tried. Now I am choosing Jisoo and Hyun. For the company. For what Hansung needs going forward. That choice has nothing to do with who you are as a person, and everything to do with what this empire requires." Inside the envelope, A cashier's check for $200,000. The deed to a one-bedroom apartment in Queens. The name and number of an attorney who specialized in arrangements that required discretion. She looked at the envelope for a long time. Then she stood up, left it on the desk, walked to the door and paused with her hand on the frame. She did not look at him. "I'm going to build something," she said quietly. "And one day you're going to be in a room that I own." She didn't wait for a response. She walked down the hall, took the elevator to the lobby, and stepped out of the Hansong penthouse with $17 in her pocket, the clothes on her back, and one sentence running clean and permanent through everything else in her head. "Watch what I build." She couch-surfed for 8 months. Brooklyn first, then the Bronx, then parts of Queens she hadn't known existed before she needed them. She worked double shifts, a diner on weekday mornings starting at 5:30, a midtown hotel on weekend nights running past midnight. The hotel was Hansong affiliated. She cleaned rooms there for 8 months without a single person connecting her to the man whose name sat above the lobby entrance. She filed that irony precisely, without emotion, in a place she would find again when she needed it. At night, she studied fabric first, deconstructing thrift store pieces on the floor of whoever's apartment she was sleeping in, mapping the logic of how structure was built into a garment before the surface ever showed it. Then business law. She found a library 3 blocks from the diner and spent every free hour reading Hansong's filings, acquisition records, annual reports. Not from obsession, from strategy. She was building a map of a man's empire, finding every load-bearing wall, every dependency, every property he was circling and didn't have yet. She was 17 years old, and she was already playing a game that wouldn't be decided for over a decade. At 22, she launched Heir. Luxury women's wear from a 400-square-foot studio in Brooklyn that smelled of machine oil and the radiator's ongoing refusal to give up. The name meant dawn in French, which she chose for the obvious reason, and also because Amara Carter, her mother, the jazz singer who had died before ever holding her, had a habit of staying up all night just to watch the light change. The first Heir collection sold modestly. The second sold better. The third sold out in 9 minutes and 12 seconds. Vogue called before the page refreshed. 3 Oscar nominees wore Heir within 18 months of each other. Net-a-Porter, Barney's, London, Paris, Lagos. Every call logged, assessed, answered in order of strategic value. Paris Fashion Week sent an invitation she declined because she had a board meeting in Seoul that week, and Seoul had always been more important. Seoul was the plan inside the plan. She opened the Heir showroom in Seoul at 25. In a building 3 blocks from the Hansong Grand Hotel. She chose that location specifically and spent the first 3 months watching the street from her second-floor office, cross-referencing faces against Hansong's public personnel directory, learning the patterns. The day, Cho Sung-jin, Park Taiwan's personal assistant, stopped on the sidewalk outside and stared at the Heir sign on the glass for 7 full seconds before continuing walking. Caroline noted the timestamp in the margin of her legal pad. 3:47 p.m. She was not waiting for a reaction. She was confirming she had been seen. There is a significant difference. She met Lim Min-young in Itaewon 3 years after the Seoul showroom opened, at a gallery neither of them had particularly wanted to attend. 2 women standing in front of the same photograph, a woman in a white dress at the edge of something that could have been a cliff or a horizon, depending on which part of the image you focused on. And within 6 minutes of conversation, they had understood something about each other that takes most people much longer to communicate. Min-young was 31, property developer, former fiancé of Hyun Park, the younger, of Taiwan's 2 Korean children, until the Park family dissolved the engagement with the same clinical efficiency they applied to everything that didn't serve the Hansong brand. Min-young's family name didn't carry sufficient weight. Her mother had been a school teacher. The Park family, in the language they used privately for these decisions, called her a distraction from the trajectory. The engagement ended. Hyun complied. He had genuinely loved her in the way 26-year-olds love people before empire teaches them the calculus of sacrifice. And he had not fully stopped grieving it, a fact Min-young knew and had decided was no longer her business to carry. What the Park family had not accounted for was Min-young's meticulousness. She kept everything. every document, every email thread, every piece of correspondence from 2 years inside the Park family orbit. Not from calculated planning. She hadn't imagined at 28 that she would ever need any of it. She kept records because she was built that way, with the instinct that makes certain people photograph everything, the knowing, before you can articulate it, that the record will one day matter. She gave Caroline the first batch of documents over dinner in Mapogu. The second came 3 months later. Over 18 months, 47 folders. Most confirmed what Caroline already suspected. Hansung's internal financial architecture, the North American acquisition timeline, the exact 3 properties the empire needed to complete its expansion merger. But the 43rd folder, labeled in Min Young's careful system, Correspondence 2019, Miscellaneous, a sealed medical summary from a private clinic in Zurich. The follow-up letter addressed to Mrs. Park, Taewon's wife, Shin Yeon-hee, at a private mailbox address used only once, for correspondence never meant to enter the main household system. The kind of address you give a clinic when you need results to arrive somewhere. Your husband will not inadvertently find them. The letter contained the results of a paternity test. Conducted on Park Jisoo, Park Taiwan was not Jisoo's biological father. Caroline read it twice at her kitchen counter in Tribeca at 11:47 on a Wednesday night. Set it down. Stood completely still for 90 seconds. Then called her attorney, David O.C. He answered on the 3rd ring, groggy. David, 7 a.m. tomorrow. I have a document that needs 3 independent verifications before I decide what to do with it. Bring whoever you need. A pause, then fully awake. How significant. Bring whoever you need, she repeated, and ended the call. David verified it. 3 times. 2 independent labs and 1 forensic document specialist, confirming the Zurich clinic's chain of custody. 6 weeks later, she called Marco in Brooklyn and said 7 words. I need a dress. Gold. Make it unforgettable. Marco took 4 days. She came to the studio at 11 p.m., stood in the fitting room while he turned on the overhead light, and looked at herself in the full-length mirror for a long time. Cassiopeia. 10,000 crystals, arranged in the exact shape of the constellation that had been overhead the night Amara Carter died, giving birth to her. The diamonds at her spine. The 6-foot train. She stood in that mirror and let herself feel, for a full 60 seconds, everything the next 72 hours would require of her. Then she squared her shoulders and said, "It's perfect." Now here is what nobody in that room understood when the elevator opened. They saw a beautiful woman in an extraordinary gown who had bypassed 3 layers of event security. Some recognized the name Aurore from the fashion pages. Some were already reaching for their phones. None of them knew who she was to the man at the podium. None of them knew about the Voss portfolio, the 3 luxury mixed-use buildings in Manhattan that Carolyn had quietly acquired 14 months prior through her holding company AC Ventures, operating under a blind LLC. Properties that every major hotel group in the city had been circling for 2 years. Properties that the Hansung North American merger absolutely depended on. None of them knew what was in the gold clutch. Not a single person in that room knew that the empire Park Taiwan was about to crown his daughter with had already been structurally dismantled by the child he handed a check to at 16 and told to disappear. Caroline moved through the room like she had reserved the space in advance. She accepted champagne, made brief eye contact with Jang Seok-wan, a board member she had identified from Hansung's public filings as personally skeptical of Jisoo's succession readiness, a 62-year-old pragmatist with 11 years on the audit committee, whose loyalty to Taiwan had limits she had mapped precisely. She gave him a targeted, precise smile. He blinked. She moved on. She felt Hyun before she found him. He was at the bar, and when their eyes met across the room, she watched his face cycle through 4 states in under 3 seconds. Recognition, calculation, the specific dread of a man watching a plan arrive at a destination he suddenly isn't certain he chose, and then controlled blankness as the Park family training overrode everything else. She gave him one small nod. His face didn't change. She was already past him. Jisoo saw her from the podium area. Jisoo's face moved through confusion, recognition, calculation, and then locked into something cold, and armored and ready. Jisoo was not the kind of woman who flinched in public. Caroline had always privately respected that. Tonight, it wouldn't be enough. Taewon stepped back from the microphone. He crossed the floor with the measured pace of a man who had never once allowed urgency to show in his walk. Stopped 2 feet from Caroline, looked at her with something older than recognition, the expression of a person confronting something they spent years choosing not to think about. "You were not on the guest list," he said. "No." She held his eyes. "But I own the building the guest list was printed in." 4 people nearest them heard it. The ripple moved outward through 300 people, like a current through water. Taewon's jaw shifted. Less than a millimeter. She caught it. She had spent 12 years cataloging his tells through every interview, every press conference, every board meeting recording she could locate. She knew exactly what that jaw movement meant. Recalculating. "This is not the appropriate venue," he said. "You chose a public event to announce the succession of your empire. Every person in this room is about to become a witness to your legacy. I am simply making sure the record is complete." She reached into the clutch and removed the first document, the Voss Portfolio Certificate of Acquisition, triple-stamped, every signature in its correct place. 3 buildings, Manhattan, acquired by AC Ventures 14 months ago. Filed, registered, irrevocable under 3 separate layers of corporate structure. Whatever Jisoo is about to announce about the North American merger no longer has a foundation. The merger depends on properties that belong to me. He took the document, read it with the methodical stillness of a man translating each word into its precise legal and financial implication, calculating simultaneously. She watched the moment he confirmed it was real. Every stamp, every signature, every registration exactly where it needed to be. His hand did not shake. She had expected that. He was too disciplined for visible physical reaction. But the jaw moved again. "You planned this for years," he said. Still quiet. Still controlled. In the specific register of a man who has just understood that he miscalculated something at a fundamental level. "You gave me 12 years, Caroline said. "What did you think I was doing with them?" "This is the moment. Right here. Before I tell you what Jisoo does next, comment below." Was Park Tae-won wrong to dismiss Caroline at 16? Or was he a man building a dynasty making the only choice available to him? I've had this argument with people I love, and I am still not recovered from it. Drop your position, like this video right now, because what Jisoo does next will divide this comment section in half, and I need it on the record before it happens. Jisoo came through the crowd like a woman trained since birth to manage catastrophes without letting anyone watching correctly identify what they were witnessing. She materialized at her father's side with the precision of 2 decades of inherited control, and her eyes, when they landed on Caroline, did what Jisoo's eyes always did: assessed, cataloged, calculated, and then settled into something hard and prepared. "Whatever you think this is," Jisoo said, voice pitched precisely low enough to be private and precisely hard enough to be unambiguous. "Understand what you are walking into. This family has resources you have not begun to calculate. Every legal structure you think you've built, we will dedicate the next decade to dismantling, and we will not stop there. Every door that opened for Aurora because someone in our network decided you were worth backing, we will close them. One by one. Every editor, every buyer, every retailer, you want to play in our world? We built this world. We know every wall in it." Delivered without raising her voice. The most threatening thing Caroline had heard in 12 years, at the volume of polite dinner conversation. Caroline let her finish, waited 4 full seconds. Then, "The Voss buildings are already mine. Your legal team spent 3 weeks trying to find a structural problem in the filing and found nothing because there is nothing to find. That fight ended 14 months ago. You are issuing threats about a war that was over before you knew it started." She opened the clutch, removed the second document, did not hand it, held it in the space between them, and waited for Jisoo to reach. Jisoo took it, read the header, read the first paragraph. And something happened in her face that Caroline had not been fully certain she would witness. Not the cold armor, not the calculating hostility, but something underneath all of that which cracked through from the place beneath the performance. The specific expression of a person who has just felt the ground shift beneath a foundation they never once doubted. "Where did you get this?" Flat. A sentence drained of everything except its words. "Your mother generated that correspondence in 2019. She was thorough. She needed documentation, and she kept it somewhere she believed was safe." Caroline kept her voice even and factual. "3 independent verifications before I walked in here tonight." Jisoo's hand tightened on the document. Her eyes moved to her father, still holding the Voss certificate, not yet seeing what Jisoo held, watching his daughter's face do something he had never in 28 years seen it do. "This is not real," Jisoo said. "You know it is. You're a precise woman. You read the chain of custody documentation attached to it. You understand exactly what it means." Jisoo's jaw set. Her voice dropped below controlled, to the place where the real things live. "You think this changes what you are. You walked in here without an invitation, wearing a dress you designed yourself to play a power game, with documents you dug out of my family's private correspondence, and you think a piece of paper makes you something. It doesn't. My father made a mistake 29 years ago, and you are that mistake in a gold dress, and nothing in that folder changes it." She used the word deliberately. She knew exactly what it cost, and she spent it anyway. It landed in Caroline's body the way it was designed to. She felt it. Let herself feel it for exactly 3 seconds, the same container she had built for every room where everything was at stake. Then she looked at Jisoo and asked the question she had been carrying for 12 years. "What am I?" Not wounded, not performative. Just the question, placed like a scalpel at the exact location where Jisoo's armor was thinnest, where Jisoo would have to choose between the answer that served the Park family and the answer that was true, and both choices cost something different. Jisoo looked at her. 1 full second with no calculation moving behind it. The armor cracked, not all the way, but enough. A fracture line visible from the top down. Her eyes filled for the exact time it took to blink, and the blink came, and the armor reassembled, but changed. Fissured. The kind of structural damage that does not reverse. "Give me the document," Taewon said. Both women turned. Jisoo's grip tightened 1 last degree. The grip of someone spending their final second before the only move available. "Jisoo!" Quiet. The specific quietness of a man who was never needed to raise his voice. She handed it to him. Released it the way you release something you have held so long the shape transferred to your hand. Stepped back. Did not look at him while he read. The deliberate avoidance of someone who cannot watch a particular thing happen in real time. He read it completely still. 300 people around them vibrating with the awareness that something seismic was happening in plain sight. They could not hear the words, but they could read bodies. They could read the way Taewon's shoulders changed by 2 degrees by the time he reached the bottom of the page. They could read Jisoo's face, which was doing something no one in this room had ever seen it do. The expression of a person discovering that the ground beneath their entire life was never solid to begin with. Mrs. Park appeared at the edge of the circle. She had been crossing the room toward the podium, and she stopped when she saw the second folder in her husband's hands. Her face in that moment told a story that 12 years of immaculate social performance had not been able to fully overwrite. She had always known this document existed. She had spent 12 years building a life in which it would never surface, managing the clinic's discretion, managing the correspondence trail. She had never fully believed she would be standing in this room when it did. "Taewon," she began. "Not now." His voice came out with the quietness of something held together at the seams, absolutely refusing to come apart in front of these witnesses, because that was the one remaining thing within his control. She stopped. An aide materialized at her elbow and guided her gently toward the outer edge of the crowd. Hyun had moved closer. He was at the edge of the circle now, close enough to see both documents, and when he processed what the second one contained, his face moved through something Caroline had not expected. Not vindication, not the satisfaction of a man who had spent his life second in his father's estimation, finally watching the favorite fall. What crossed Hyun's face was grief. Real, uncomplicated grief. Watching a sibling absorb a revelation they didn't see coming. Couldn't stop. Weren't the intended target of. And being unable to do a single thing about any of it. He had used Caroline as a lever. He was standing at the edge of the circle watching what that use had produced, and the math was more expensive than he had calculated, and he did not look like he wanted the answer he was getting. "How long?" Taewon said. He was looking at the space where his wife had been standing. Silence. "How long?" he said again. The silence that answered was its own kind of answer, the kind that cannot be spoken louder than. Jisoo made a sound, barely audible, the specific sound of something structural giving way inside a person faster than they can prevent it from reaching the surface, and walked. Through the crowd, through the side door, into the corridor beyond. Nobody stopped her. He found her in the corridor. Hyun, standing near the far window, the city blazing 42 floors below them, arriving at a conclusion he should have reached weeks earlier. "You knew it was me?" he said. Not a question. "Within 4 minutes of reading the message," she said. He exhaled, controlled, a substitute for a much larger reaction. "I didn't know about Jisoo. I want you to understand that clearly. When I sent you the tip, I was trying to slow the succession. I was angry, and I wanted Jisoo's position questioned. I have spent my entire life watching that man pour everything into a daughter who isn't—" He stopped. "Who isn't his?" Caroline said. The silence confirmed it. "You didn't know that part, but you knew enough to use me." "Yes." She turned around. His face was the face of a man who had paid a price he hadn't budgeted for and was honest enough not to pretend otherwise. "You used me as a lever," she said. "You handed me the window, without knowing what I was going to do with it. That is not strategy. That is gambling with someone else's chips." "I know. Jisoo is your sister." "I know." His jaw tightened. "Whatever exists between us, I didn't want that for her. That document, that information, I didn't want that to be what tonight cost her." Caroline looked at him for a long moment. "I believe you didn't know about the document," she said. "That doesn't change what you did, but I believe you." She paused. "For what it's worth, she will survive it. She's a park. Your family is built for survival. It is the one thing your father did right by all of you." Something moved behind Hyun's eyes, the specific look of a man being seen clearly for the first time by someone who had every reason to see him badly, and chose precision instead. "What did you actually come here for tonight?" he said. "I came for my mother," Caroline said. "I came so that no one in this city could pretend anymore that Amara Carter didn't give Park Taewon his firstborn daughter. That is what I came here for." A pause. "The buildings are a bonus." She walked back toward the gala without looking back. Behind her, quietly, in Korean, Hyun said something he clearly did not intend her to catch. She caught it. 3 years of deliberate study for exactly this contingency. He said, "She is more like him than she knows." She filed it. She would decide later whether it was a compliment. Before she reached the elevator, Jang Seok-won intercepted her. 62. Audit Committee. 11 years. A reputation for pragmatism that consistently outweighed loyalty when the two came into conflict. "Ms. Carter," he said, "I would very much like to have breakfast with you and your attorney." "Monday morning," she said. 8 a.m., my office in Tribeca. Bring whoever needs to be in the room." He nodded once. "The board has been discussing the North American portfolio for 2 years. Your position in the Voss buildings puts you at an intersection we have not previously had to account for. We find that we would like to account for it." "Monday," she said, and left him standing there. She was in the elevator before she let herself feel the full weight of what Jang Seok-won had just told her. The board was already moving. Pragmatists. They would not let loyalty to Taiwan's succession plan cost them the North American market if a better arrangement existed. A better arrangement was standing in their elevator in a gold dress with the Voss certificate in her clutch and a brand on 3 continents. She had told Taiwan she didn't come to take Hansung. She had meant it when she said it. She was still deciding if she meant it now. She stepped back into the gala, found Taiwan standing where she had left him, The cluster around them thinned, the room doing its best to reconstruct normalcy around an event that defied it. She walked back to him and stood close enough that only he could hear. "I didn't come here to take Hansung," she said. "You can keep the empire. I built my own." He turned to look at her, and this time, for the first time in their entire history together, he looked at her without the filter of calculation. Just looked. The way a person looks at something they lost before they understood what it was. "I came because you were about to stand at that podium and complete the erasure. 300 people were about to hear the story of Park Tae-won's legacy, and I was not going to be in it. My mother was not going to be in it." Her voice was steady. She had not rehearsed this. Some things don't need rehearsing. Because they have been true for so long, they become part of the bone. Amara Carter died bringing me into this world. She gave one night to a man who became one of the most powerful people in this city, and she never received a single thing from that. Not acknowledgement, not presence, not even her daughter growing up with the right to say her father's name out loud. My mother deserved better than to be a footnote you could erase. She paused. I spent 12 years making sure her name was attached to something they could not ignore. Tonight, every person in this room knows Amara Carter existed. That is what I came for. Taewon said nothing for a long time. She was remarkable. His voice barely carried. The words he had not said in 28 years, said now in this room to the only person who had the right to hear them. Your mother, I know that does not... It doesn't, Caroline said. But I heard it. She picked up her champagne glass from the nearby table, touched it lightly against the Voss certificate still in his hand. Not a toast, a period at the end of a 12-year sentence. Then she walked to the elevator and did not look back. The morning came through Caroline's Tribeca windows with the complete indifference of a city that does not pause for personal reckonings. She was still in the gold dress. She had not changed. She sat on the window ledge with coffee going warm between both hands and her phone face down beside her, watching the streets 28 floors below fill with people who had been asleep while her entire life rearranged itself. When she turned the phone over, it had been 40 minutes since the first alert. 49 missed calls, 63 messages, 4 Google News alerts. She read only the first headline. Aurora founder, Caroline Carter identified as Park Tae-won's daughter at Hansung Gala, and she owns the buildings he needed. She set it face down. David had called twice. The deal was done, and the buildings were hers. Hyun had texted at 2:47 a.m. She read it slowly. I didn't know about Jisoo. I'm asking you to hear that specifically. When I reached out to you, I was angry, and I used you as a lever, and that's true, and I'm not pretending it isn't. But I didn't know that document existed. What happened to her tonight was not what I meant to cost. I'm sorry. She read it twice, set the phone down without responding. Not punishment, just the rules she kept. Don't speak into uncertainty. Min Young had sent a voice note from Seoul at 6:14 a.m. local time. Caroline played it through the speaker. Slightly breathless, slightly giddy, the voice of a woman who had been awake all night watching alerts cascade in. Ani, you trended. Not Hansung, you. Caroline Carter was #1 in Korea for 6 hours, and Aurora was trending at #3. Your Seoul store had a line outside before it opened. I went there myself at 8:45 because I couldn't sleep, and I counted 32 people waiting before 9 a.m. 32. It worked. All of it. Every folder, every dinner in the rain in Mapo-gu. Call me, Caroline typed back. Every bit of this was yours too. Book your flight. Dinner is on me. Bring 3 years of receipts. I'm paying you back with interest, and I mean that literally. Jisoo had called 4 times between 7 and 8:30 a.m. controlled intervals. Not panic. Persistence. Jisoo was not done. Caroline had not expected her to be. That conversation was coming. It would be complicated in ways she couldn't fully predict, because Jisoo was no longer simply an adversary. She was a woman who had just found out the ground beneath her entire life was built on something that didn't exist. Caroline knew something specific about that feeling. She did not have contempt for it. Taiwan had not called. Expected. He was calculating, assembling a position. When he called, she would decide whether to answer. That sentence, she would decide, had never been true before last night, And she sat with it the way you sit with a door that has been locked for 12 years, and has finally, on your terms, come open. She thought about what he had said. She was remarkable, your mother. She had been carrying those words since the 42nd floor, turning them over the way you turn over something unfamiliar, unsure whether to keep it or set it back down. She kept them, not for him, for Amara. Anything about Amara was hers. At 9:15 in the morning, her phone buzzed again on the cushion beside her. Not Jisoo's number, unknown, Seoul area code. She almost didn't answer. She answered. The voice on the other end was a woman's, older, the specific Korean cadence of someone who had spent years speaking carefully, around the edges of things rather than directly at them. Ms. Carter, the voice said, you don't know me. My name is Shin Yeon-hee. I believe you met my husband last night. Caroline went completely still. Shin Yeon-hee, Mrs. Park, Taewon's wife, Jisoo's mother, the woman who had commissioned a paternity test in 2019 and spent the years since managing its existence with the same precision she managed everything else. I know who you are, Caroline said. I thought you might. A pause. The pause of someone measuring the distance between what they have prepared to say and what they actually need to say. I have something that belongs to you. Not a document, not a legal matter, something older than any of this. Another pause. Your mother left something with me. Before Jisoo was born. Before any of this existed. Your mother left something in my care, and I have spent 28 years deciding what the right thing to do with it was. The voice was steady in the way voices are steady when they have been rehearsed many times and are finally being used. I think the right thing is to give it to you. Caroline sat down. She had stood in a room of 300 people last night and dismantled an empire with complete composure. She had looked her father in the eyes and delivered 12 years of truth without her voice breaking once. She had faced Jisoo's most precisely aimed cruelty and sent the question back with a scalpel. She sat down now on the window ledge with the gold dress pooling around her and the city 28 floors below, because the one thing she had not planned for, the one variable not in any of the 47 folders, not in any of the legal filings, not in 12 years of meticulous preparation, was this. Something from Amara. What is it? She asked. Her voice was steady. Barely. A letter, Mrs. Park said. She wrote it the night before she went to the hospital. She gave it to me because she didn't know who else to trust with it. We knew each other, briefly, in a way that is complicated to explain now. She had no one in New York who wasn't connected to Taiwan in a way that made her afraid. I was the only person she could think of. A long pause. She asked me to give it to her daughter when the daughter was ready for it. I have been deciding for 28 years when that was. Caroline could not speak. I think, Mrs. Park said carefully, that last night answered the question. They agreed on a place, a time, 3 days from now, neutral ground, no attorneys, no documents, just 2 women and a letter that a jazz singer had written the night before she died and never got to deliver. Caroline set the phone down on the window ledge, looked at the city, and here is what I need you to understand before this video ends. Caroline Carter did not do this for revenge. Revenge is the fire you build in the rubble of something that burned you first, and it gives the person who hurt you a permanent starring role in the story you tell about yourself. What Caroline built was something different. She looked at the structure of a man's empire, identified every load-bearing dependency, every property he needed that he didn't own yet, every weakness in the succession plan that had been used to justify erasing her. And she spent 12 years, quietly, precisely, building herself into the exact intersection where all of those dependencies ran through her hands. That is not revenge. That is engineering. And she could have taken Hansung. With the Voss portfolio in her name and the paternity document as the final card, she had everything necessary to demand the seat that was taken from her before she was old enough to understand what seats meant. She chose not to. She chose Aurora, The thing she built in a 400 square foot studio in Brooklyn at 22 with no name behind her and nobody's hand extended toward her with anything except a tray she was expected to carry. The thing that was completely, entirely, unconditionally hers. That choice is the whole story. Everything else was proof. She raised the coffee cup to the window. Not to Park Tae-won, not to the Voss portfolio or the board meeting on Monday, or Jang Sok-won's pragmatism, or Jisoo's 4 unanswered calls. Not to any of it. To Amara Carter, who sang jazz in rooms where men forgot their own names, who died at 24 on a delivery table before she ever held her daughter, who left Caroline nothing except a birth constellation, and an iron spine, and whatever it is that runs in the blood of certain people and makes them impossible to erase, no matter how many envelopes slide across how many desks, and who had, apparently, left one more thing. A letter, in a safe, kept for 28 years by a woman who finally understood it was time. The comment section is going to combust over this, and I need you in it right now. Did Mrs. Park do the right thing keeping that letter for 28 years? Or did she steal something from Caroline that should have been hers decades ago? Drop your answer below. Fight each other. I'll be in the replies reading every single take. Subscribe, because the letter changes everything we think we know about this story, and about every person in it. And you are going to want to be here when we find out what it says. Like this video, share it. And if you know someone who was handed an envelope and told to disappear quietly, this one is for them. The table you build yourself has no guest list. Nobody gets to tell you that you weren't invited. See you in the next one.